Hello, and welcome back to From the Therapy Room Psychology of Mind and Body. This is a space where we gently explore the inner landscapes of human mind, where psychology meets lived experiences, and where the stories we carry inside finally find language. In this podcast, we explore the psychology behind everyday emotional experiences, the things we often struggle to understand within ourselves. And today we are going to talk about something almost everyone experiences, but very few people truly understand, and that is overthinking. Before we begin, it might help to pause for a moment and ask ourselves a simple question. How many times in the last week have you replayed something in your mind? A conversation that happened, a message someone sent, a decision you made, or maybe a decision you're afraid to make. For many people, overthinking does not feel dramatic. It feels quiet. It happens while brushing your teeth, while lying in bed at night, while driving somewhere. The mind begins with a small question. Did I say something wrong? Did I do something wrong? And slowly that question multiplies. Maybe they misunderstood me. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe they're upset. And before you realize it, your mind has built an entire emotional story around a moment that lasts only a few seconds. This is the quiet nature of overthinking. It rarely announces itself, it simply pulls the mind into mental loops of analysis. And many people who struggle with chronic overthinking often say something very similar. My mind just doesn't stop. But what we often discover in psychology is that the mind is not simply thinking. The mind is trying to resolve an emotional tension that has not yet found closure. Many people imagine overthinking as simply thinking too much. But psychologically speaking, overthinking is rarely about thinking more, it is about thinking in circles. It is the mind trying to solve something that feels emotionally unresolved. A conversation that keeps replaying, a decision that refuses to settle, a fear that keeps whispering, what if you're wrong? So, overthinking is not just simply a habit of mind, it is often the mind's attempt to create safety in uncertainty. When the brain senses emotional ambiguity, it begins searching for the answer. It reviews the past, it predicts the future, it dissects possibilities. And before we realize it, we are trapped in the loop of mental simulations. Psychologists call this rumination and worry loops. Rumination focuses on the past, worry focuses on the future, but both are forms of overthinking. Both are the mind trying to control something that cannot be fully controlled. And this is why overthinking can feel so exhausting because the mind is working overtime, trying to create certainty in a world that is inherently uncertain. Let's talk about what psychology says about overthinking. Researches in cognitive psychology shows that overthinking is deeply connected with anxiety, emotional regulation, and the brain's threat detection system. Our brain has a structure called amygdala, which acts like an emotional alarm system. Whenever something feels uncertain or threatening, even socially threatening, the amygdala becomes activated. This could be, did I say the wrong time? Did I say the wrong thing? What do they think of me? Did I make a mistake? So, once the emotional alarm is activated, another part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, begins trying to analyze the situation. It tries to think its way out of the discomfort. But here lies the paradox. The more the brain analyzes the discomfort, the more attention the discomfort receives. And attention amplifies emotional experiences. This is why overthinking often intensifies anxiety instead of resolving it. A study published in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that people who engage in high level of rumination tend to experience higher level of depression and anxiety because the brain becomes trained to revisit emotional pain repeatedly. In other words, overthinking becomes a mental habit of returning to unresolved feelings. Let's try to understand from a little philosophical perspective also, because I consider human, we are whole, so there is just not one part of us. There are many aspects and there are many perspectives we can take to understand these things. So, from a philosophical perspective, overthinking reveals something deeply human. It reveals our desire for certainty in an unpredictable world. Human consciousness is unique because we can imagine the future and reflect on the past. But this gift also comes with a burden. We are capable of imagining problems that do not yet exist. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. Because when life presents us with choices, possibilities, and uncertainties, the mind begins searching for guarantees. But life rarely provides guarantees, and so the mind keeps searching, keeps analyzing, keeps questioning until thinking itself becomes a form of emotional exhaustion. In many ways, overthinking is uh, not simply a psychological phenomena, it is an existential one. It reflects the tension between the human need for meaning and the unpredictable nature of life. Human begin human beings have always struggled with uncertainty. All of us are aware of this fact. And ancient philosophers spoke about this long before modern psychology existed. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, some things are within our control and some things are not. Overthinking often happens when we try to mentally control things that are fundamentally outside our control. What someone else thinks, how someone else feels, how the future unfolds. And when the mind cannot control these things, it tries to predict them instead. Prediction becomes the mind's substitute for control. But predictions are rarely accurate, and so the mind keeps thinking, keeps adjusting, keeps analyzing. That is why overthinking is often a search for certainty in an uncertain world. Because this podcast is related how I have observed things in the therapy room. So let's just talk about what overthinking looks like in the therapy room. I mean, I hope that it will provide a more relatable kind of thing for the listeners. In therapy, overthinking rarely arrives announcing itself as overthinking. It arrives disguised. Someone might say, I can't stop analyzing everything. Another person might say, my mind never shuts off. Someone else might say, I replay conversations in my head again and again. But when we begin exploring gently, we often discover that beneath the overthinking, there is usually an emotional wound or fear, a fear of rejection, a fear of failure, a fear of making the wrong choice, or sometimes a deep fear of being misunderstood. One client once told me, my mind keeps replaying conversation because I'm trying to figure out where I went wrong. And as we explored further, what we discovered was not just overthinking, it was a long history of feeling criticized while growing up. The mind has learned that analyzing every interaction might prevent future criticism. Another client said, if I stop thinking about it, I feel like something bad will happen. And here is the overthinking was connected to anxiety and a need for control. The mind believed that constant analysis could somehow prevent future mistakes. Overthinking in these moments become a protective strategy. The mind is trying to protect the self from the emotional pain. But protection can sometimes become a prison because when thinking becomes excessive, the mind never truly rests. There is a moment that often happens in therapy that is quite revealing, sorry. A client once said something very interesting to me. She said, I spend hours thinking about what people think of me. And when I gently ask her, how much time do you think other people spend time thinking about you? She paused and slowly smiled because in the moment she realized something very important. Most people are too busy worrying about what others think of them. Overthinking often convinces us that everyone is analyzing us, when in reality, everyone else is caught inside their own internal dialogue. This realization can be incredibly liberating because it slowly shifts the mind from self conscious analysis to self compassion. Neuroscience researches has shown that overthinking activates something called the default mode network DMN in the brain. This network active when the mind is not focused on the present moment. It's associated with self-reflection, memory, imagining the future, and mental simulations. While the DMN is essential for creativity and reflection, excessive activation can lead to persistent rumination. In the previous episode, we explored the psychology of rumination. Rumination is when the mind keeps revisiting the past, analyzing what happened and why it happened. Overthinking, however, is a broader psychological pattern. It can include rumination, but it also includes something else psychologists call anticipatory worry. Rumination look backward, worry look forward. Overthinking moves in both directions. It travels between the past and the future, rarely resting in the present moment. The mind asks, why did this happen? And at the same time, what if this happens again? And in this constant movement between past and future, the present moment quietly disappears. Studies from Harvard neuroscientists have shown that people spend almost 40% of their waking hours thinking about something other than the present moment. And the interesting part is that the study found that a wandering mind is often an unhappy mind. Not because thinking is harmful, but because thinking disconnected from the present moment and can trap the mind in cycles of regret and anticipation. Researchers from the University of Michigan found that individuals who engage in chronic overthinking often experience increased stress hormone activity, particularly cortisol. The brain remains in a mild state of alertness, which is why people who overthink frequently also experience difficulty sleeping, mental fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and emotional exhaustion. Their mind appears busy all the time, but internally the nervous system is actually tired. Overthinking consumes psychological energy, and this is why many people say, I'm mentally exhausted even though I haven't done anything physically demanding. To understand it more deeply, we need to understand the emotional roots of overthinking. Overthinking rarely begins in adulthood, it often developed much earlier. Children who grew up in the environments where mistakes are heavily criticized may learn to analyze everything carefully. Children who experience emotional unpredictability may develop a habit of mentally scanning situations for potential danger. Over time, these patterns become internalized. The mind begins to believe if I analyze enough, I will prevent pain. If I think enough, I will find the right answer. But emotional life is rarely solved through analysis alone. Some experiences need to be felt, not solved. And this is where overthinking often becomes stuck. Because the mind keeps searching for a logical answer to something that is fundamentally emotional in nature. There's another psychological insight about overthinking is that some things that surprises many people. Sometimes thinking is actually a form of emotional avoidance. Instead of feeling sadness, the mind analyzes the situation. Instead of feeling grief, the mind searches for explanations. Instead of feeling vulnerability, the mind dissects possibilities. Thinking becomes a way of staying in the head rather than entering the heart. In therapy, this moment is very powerful. When someone slowly realizes, I have been analyzing my emotions instead of feeling them. And when feeling finally begins, the overthinking slowly loosens its grip. At the core of overthinking lies a powerful illusion, the illusion that if we think hard enough, we will eventually find certainty. But life rarely operates through certainty. Relationships are uncertain, decisions are uncertain, even our own emotions can surprise us. Overthinking attempts to outthink uncertainty, but uncertainty is not something the mind can eliminate. It is something we slowly learn to live alongside. This is why psychological healing often involves learning tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to say, I may not know everything right now, and that is okay. Because it's easy to criticize ourselves for overthinking. People often say, I wish my mind would just stop. But the mind is not trying to harm us, it is trying to help. It is trying to predict, protect, and prevent pain. In therapy, one of the most compassionate shifts happens when someone realizes that my overthinking is not my enemy. It is a strategy my mind developed to survive uncertainty. And once we see it in that way, we can begin to relate to our mind differently, not with frustration, but with understanding, and I must say, with compassionate understanding. Overthinking shows up in very ordinary moments of life. You send a message, the person doesn't reply. The mind begins, did I say something wrong? You attend a meeting, and later that evening, your mind replays everything you said. I should have explained that better. Or maybe you are making a life decision, a job change, or a relationship choice, a move to another city, or something like that. The mind starts calculating every possible outcome. And while thinking can be helpful when making decisions, overthinking creates something different. It creates decision paralysis. The mind becomes so busy analyzing possibilities that it becomes afraid to move forward. Psychologists sometimes call this analysis paralysis. When thinking becomes so excessive that it stops action together, healing from chronic overthinking does not mean stopping thought completely. That would be impossible. Instead, it means changing our relationship with thought. Some practices that research has shown to be helpful include mindfulness meditation, which helps bring awareness back to the present moment. Another one is cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps identify pattern of rumination and challenge unhelpful thinking loops. Another one is emotional awareness practice, which helps individual recognize feeling beneath the thinking. And perhaps the most importantly, learning to allow uncertainty. Because sometimes the healthiest response is not to find the perfect answer, but to accept that life is unfolding in real time. But what to do when you notice overthinking starting or has already started? I would like to share a few simple practices that can help interrupt the loop. Not by forcing the mind to stop thinking, but by gently shifting its direction. First one is name the pattern. Sometimes simply recognizing what is happening can change your relationship with it. You might pause and say to yourself, this is my mind overthinking, not judging it, not just noticing it. Naming a mental pattern activates the brain awareness system that helps create a small distance between you and your thought loop. The another small and simple practice is return to the body. Overthinking lives mostly in mind, but the body exists in the present moment. So, a simple grounding practice can help. Take a slow breath, notice your feet touching the floor, notice the sensation in your hand. This gently shift attention from mental loop to physical presence, and the nervous system begin to settle. Another simple practice you can include, ask one helpful question. Instead of analyzing endlessly, ask yourself, is there any action I can take right now? If the answer is yes, take the action. If the answer is no, then the mind simply be searching for control. And in that moment, the healthiest step may be allowing uncertainty. If you recognize yourself in today's conversation, if you have ever spent long nights thinking about something you cannot resolve, please know that this is a deeply human experience. A thinking mind is not a broken mind. It is simply a mind that has learned to search for answers. And sometimes healing begins not by silencing the mind, but by learning when it is safe to let the question rest. Overthinking is not a sign that something is wrong with your mind. In many ways, it is a sign that your mind cares deeply. It wants to understand, it wants to protect, it wants to get things right. But the mind does not always need to solve everything. Sometimes it simply needs permission to rest. And perhaps the quiet wisdom we can take from today's conversation is this, that clarity rarely comes from thinking harder. It often comes from stepping out of the loop and returning to the present moment. Thank you for spending this time with me today. This has been from the therapy room, Psychology of Mind and Body. If I hope it's going to be resonate with so many of you, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, take care of your mind, your body, and the quiet spaces within you. See you next time. I'll be sitting just next beside to you. Take care.